Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cutting Through. It's Davina Stanley here with Kerry Butler from the testing company today. I really look forward to this conversation. Kerry's going to talk to us about testing, user acceptance testing, software testing, and how to engage stakeholders about this somewhat obscure, at least to me, area of business that actually turned out to be a lot more interesting than I'd expected. Hello, Kerry. Great to talk to you again.
Great to talk to you, Davina. How are you?
Really well, really well. So tell us a little bit about testing. When I heard the first time that that's what you did, I wasn't sure how to connect that with you. It's really like a procedural type of a thing, and I'm confident you're very thorough, but it didn't strike me as something that you would find fun, but you find testing fun.
It is really interesting to me, and I would actually think it's more interesting to others than they suspect, because what I found challenging with testing is that it is about a little bit of creativity, believe it or not, because you have to think about the world in the way that end users think about the world. And so it is not just doing the procedures, it is about being in their shoes and trying to be different personas and how they see the world. And that's how I fell into testing. So it is connected. It does seem odd when I say the same. When I tell people that I do testing at parties, they immediately start to yawn. So I get the reaction, but there are some interesting aspects of it.
Yeah, no, that's fabulous, because I guess I had a basic idea because I do a lot of work in finance and projects where there are a lot of technology projects. So I understand the importance of it. But when we spoke last time, I guess you described it as thinking a little bit like a hacker.
Yeah, it's thinking outside the box, right? Look, we know all of the latest incidents that hit the news waves as far as breaches and security and old issues that have now cropped up and caused concern. But that's where testing really becomes an art, as well as those procedural things that you know so well. We need to be really thorough about what we do, but there is some thinking outside the box and thinking about things in a different way so that we can give our companies the best chance to prevent those things from happening that we all know that hits the news headlines. So that's where it becomes a little more creative, and that's where it's about getting the right people who really have an opportunity to look at things in a strategic way so that they can start to not only look at the positive scenarios, but some of the negative scenarios and try to do the things that people don't expect us to do, which actually is a good thing.
Yes. And that point, I think, about doing the things that people don't expect you to do is that's where the game's really at, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it. So
Yeah.
when I'll tell you a little bit about myself and how I got into this world. So I've been testing for a little over 25 years. I started in as a funnily enough, in finance in a bank in Houston, Texas, and ended up really being bored of spreadsheets in the bank. And then over time, they said, "Oh, but you seem to know the systems quite well. Can you help us with some user acceptance testing?" So that's how I stumbled into the world of testing. And then I found it really fascinating to try to break systems in an effort to help our company, which was the best part of it. Is I got to do things that I really shouldn't do. I got to push that button that says you should only push it once, and I push it 4 times, and it breaks the system. This is a great thing, and that's what I found fascinating. And I've used that little bit of I guess, bad boy in me to kind of do that.
I must have had some fun with you.
Yes, throughout my life. And I've taken that to, testing across the world. So I've done testing for, companies as big as Apple and as small as mom and pop software companies. And not only that, doing testing, but helping organizations move from more of that, like you said, just kind of ABC testing to some more sophisticated and trying to make sure that they have a strategy around testing that really puts them in the best place.
No, that's interesting. And I guess when you're starting to think about strategy, you're starting to think about actually encouraging decision makers to invest in
Yeah.
that you're doing too, which is part of why I thought it'd be interesting to talk to you, because if I'd had this idea that testing was just this basic sort of routine procedural thing, my guess is, given the number of stories I work on and business stories I help people with over a year, and if my understanding isn't that amazing, then I bet there's a lot of decision makers out there who's not really that amazing either, which then made me think, I wonder how Kerry persuades them to invest in this sort of stuff. And tell us a little bit about what works. How do you engage people in investing in a testing program?
Yeah, it's really difficult. I can tell you that sometimes because, like you would know, really the sexy stuff is to build the stuff, not necessarily to make sure that it's of the right quality. And I know that doesn't sound right, but really, when you think about it, there's an assumption that when you build it, it's the right quality anyway. So let's just, spend our money, our effort, our time on that. But what I found successful and what, TTC, the test consultancy company that I work for, has found to be the most valuable is helping organizations test at the right point so that they're not actually spending the money in the wrong way. They're investing in the right way. So yes, you can test at the end of a process, and that is effective. It's been done that way for many years, but you spend a lot of money doing that, and you have to use a lot of time and resources, and it's rework is what we call it, because what you've done is you've produced something, you find an issue, and then you send it back through that process, and then you do it again, and then you send it back through the process to be tested, and if we find an issue, we keep going back and forth. Really time consuming, really not productive when it comes to the best that an organization can do. So what we try to do is convince people and show them that the earlier that you start this testing process, the better. And not only with professional testers, but with other people in your organization. So really having a mindset that, pulling that testing to the left is what we call it. So shifting that left is the way that you can do it in a economical way, but also in a way that really starts to benefit. So you start to get through your development cycle a lot faster. So I know I'm going into technical details for people, but there's a benefit to doing it early in the process. And if you're talking to a program manager or project manager or CFO or CIO or CTO, really that's the message, is that, the earlier that you start the conversations around quality and testing and when it can be done, the more money you'll save ultimately, and the faster you'll produce that software because you won't be sending it back and forth.
And that's interesting, because I guess there's huge value for the organisation in that regard, isn't there? Because you're speeding up their development process by intervening earlier. Although the idea of slowing down to speed up can feel a little bit confining, a bit uncomfortable.
Yes. It feels odd at times because, and you would know that the conversation around most, CIO tables and CTO tables is about agile and moving the organization to be able to move with agility and respond to change, and not only respond to change, but make sure that customers get what they need in a more, a responsive way. And really the way you do that is put people together who can do not only development and but test as well. And if you do that where they work directly with each other, you get a so much better outcome overall, because people are actually doing it together and at the earliest part of the development cycle, instead of just pushing it to the end, which is kind of a traditional waterfall kind of delivery.
Yeah, I was talking with a client. I was helping them build a story yesterday, actually, to get permission to do some last minute testing. And I was thinking of you when we were doing that. They needed to get permission to have, I think it was 3 people work for 5 days to do production testing over the weekend, so they could meet a global deadline. And I thought, oh, I wonder what Kerry would have done about that.
Yes,
We all understand
it does.
that wasn't ideal too. But listening to you speak there, you're talking about agile, which it certainly sounds like you're working with an agile model to bring, the thinking and planning early. But it sounds like you're almost trying to do yourself out of a job a little bit.
It is. It's interesting because
How does that work?
I think it over time, I think what we've realized is that there's more value in trying to do things a smarter way than trying to add people. Traditionally, from a testing perspective, you're right. We add people and resources, and those people help test along the way, and we can build up big teams of testers who can help at the end of the process. And that's a way to do business, right? It's still being done, and people do it all the time. But what we try to advocate is just a little something different to make it so that you start to see that value in doing something that produces quality early, and it does do us out of hiring lots of consultants and placing them in organization. It does, but what we find is that we end up doing a lot more testing with a lot fewer people because we try to do it smarter. So along with the trying to buddy with a developer, we advocate automation, which has been around for many, many years, but we're trying to make sure that there's a strategy around that automation so that you really pick off the right automation at the right time. You do it at the right layers, and that way it actually produces the outcome that you expect. Many people have just thrown technology at the issue, and they end up not realizing any results and not being able to track the ROI on what they've done. And so we really try to show that you can get an ROI if you do these things.
Yeah, no, interesting. And it sounds like there's a couple of ROIs that you're talking about there, aren't they? Firstly, to spend less on testing, but to do it earlier. So that's one way of just reducing the costs and magnifying the return. But also by doing it sooner, it sounds like you might deliver the product more quickly, you might ship more quickly because you're not completing that whole cycle and then finding a boatload of problems and then coming all the way back to the beginning, reworking the whole thing. So it's less work for you, but it's also less work for the client. They're going to get a faster deliverable, aren't they?
Yeah, they'll definitely get the outcome to the customer faster. And we still want to make sure that there is customer testing or end user testing or UAT. So that's all there as well. But we know that we've built a much more robust, a much more quality product at the beginning stages. So we know that the issues that we'll find will be minor, or they'll be issues that we can most likely fix on the fly. And that's the kind of outcome you want, so that you can hit the customer realm and know that you're already pleasing people. So yeah, that's the way we want to look at it. And when we talk about really getting that return, we're also talking about giving the organization an asset. So if I, as a tester, come to you and I do some great testing, you pat me on the back, and then I may leave 6 months from now and go do some other things. But when we really look at how we do it better, the reason we like to automate a lot of it is because then you have these automated scripts that exist, and anyone can run them, and they actually allow you to continue some of that testing that you've built up over time, and you can do it a lot faster instead of having to go back and bring on a whole team every time you do a new release. You actually, I don't like to say push the button and it just runs, because it's never that simple. It's never that simple, but it is, trying to make sure that you have something that's built up as an asset for the organization, and again, providing value versus kind of a throwaway process that you've had people who've learned the system and they've moved on.
And so I'm hearing here a really terrific value proposition, understanding where the value is for the customer, the client, and then targeting those people with the messages, sharing the value that you deliver. So you're talking about impact in these conversations. I'm sitting here thinking, maybe if I were to be a bit cheeky, I think these are C-suite sorts of messages. These are decision maker messages, the people who are really concerned about the ROI. I can imagine product managers also being really keen to respond to these sorts of messages. Do you find there are situations where perhaps there's vested interest in this long project where people might think, actually, I just really like this team and I want to keep working on this. I don't want it to be over because then I'll have to start something new and that's a bit of a bore. Do you have to differentiate your messaging according to perhaps the lower to mid-level people versus the senior people?
Absolutely, and you hit it on the head. There's different interest based on who you are and your context, right? Because as you can imagine, I'm secure in my job. I've done this for a long time. I love what I do, or I do it really well for the organization. Why do I want to change? So trying to break through that and trying to give those people an incentive to learn something new, try to do it smarter, is a different message than talking about ROI, because they certainly don't care about that, and they don't. It's not that they don't want the organization to succeed, but they have a different motivation. So what we try to do on the level of getting to the team is just try to have the team really focus on the smart stuff, the stuff that you really require people to think outside the box, use their expertise. We want that testing to be done by those people, but we take all of that mundane testing, and that's the stuff that we automate so that we can run that on a consistent basis. We don't have to worry about that stuff. So really it frees up people to start to think creatively and use their background and experience in the right way versus just being there doing all the mundane along and then not really being able to use their creativity because they're just doing a whole bunch of just core testing stuff.
So do you find that most of the people in the testing departments that you're coaching and guiding in this way actually want to change and want to do the fun stuff? Do they see it as the fun stuff?
Oh, that's a great question, and I think it varies tremendously. But if I put it into some of my recent engagements, I think there's the two camps. One is a camp who is really fascinated by all of the new stuff that's been happening, but they haven't had maybe haven't had access to it. So they haven't been able to really get into some of the new technologies or the new delivery techniques or DevOps or whatever else is the flavor of the month for IT. So those people are really excited when you start to offer new ways of doing it and try to break the mold and say that, look, we know that you've tried this before, it's failed, but we can kind of coach you and guide you so that you can do something that really is effective. We've seen it work over and over again across the globe, and they jump right on it, and it's great. But then you have that side, as you can imagine, who are really comfortable in their skin. They don't want to learn anything new. They see it as a challenge, as potential threat ultimately, that you're coming in and you're suggesting new things. And in those instances, what we're really trying to do is help them really open up that creativity and give them some new things to think about. That's a harder and it's a longer sell, as you could imagine, but it does work when we really just kind of break it down to the types of people and who they are, try to look at their motivation and what's going to get them on the other side and try to work to that. And when we typically have a high degree of success getting those people to jump on board, but it just takes a little bit longer.
Yes, and I think your point about understanding motivations is really essential, isn't it? And ultimately, that's what good communication is all about, isn't it?
Yeah.
Once you understand what people's motivations are individually as a person, but also then in terms of their role and their KPIs and their deliverables, then you can really craft messages that land, can't you? You can cut.
That's it. And we've worked with organizations, so we quite often come to an organization and they have many partners, many delivery partners, business partners who they work with, whether it's a top 4 consultancy or one of the other organizations, across the globe. They all have their individual motivations as well and their KPIs that they're driven to. So when you come in and suggest that we'll reduce the number of people, but we will do it in a faster, smarter way, there's already a challenge there because a lot of their KPIs are, internally at least are by the number of people that they have placed in an organization. So, what we've done
Yes, your consulting partners, yes, they get
Yes.
remunerated according to the number of people they provide. Yes, of course.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. So they are
Okay.
less
Excited.
motivated to do it smarter or faster or better because they know that that ultimately will reduce the number of consultants required. But we've over time learned how to work with them in partnership and making sure again that it's not about a reduction of numbers instantly. What it is more coverage. So we can do more testing over time versus if you were originally only do, and I'm putting a number, say 100 tests, because that's the capacity of your team. Now, what we can do is we can offer the organization a way to do 300 or 400 tests with the same team because we've just done it in a better way so that everybody still gets what they want out of it, which we get a better quality product because we know we've tested all the things that we wanted to instead of having to stop testing early because we couldn't have the capacity to deliver.
Okay, that's interesting. And in light of what's been in the news in the last few weeks here in Australia, but also particularly today, I read a story about Microsoft finding an open door in something that had been decommissioned, from on their side in about 2005, and we're recording this, what is that, 2022? So that's
Yes,
time ago.
it's very long.
Very old technology. Technology goes, and it's putting out a very significant risk that some people have discovered and are really exploiting. And there was something like 1 million systems,
Wow.
really
Yeah, that's
exposed.
incredible. And it is because people that they don't want to spend the money to do that kind of testing, and we want to really allow them to give them a reason to have that core testing always done no matter what, and that's the stuff that you can catch when you make sure that you don't skip those things just to test the new stuff, which is often what happens. It's not usually an intentional thing. It is a budget thing, and it is trying to meet a deadline thing. And what we're trying to do is say that you can still accomplish that quality that you really want out of, and we all have the same desire to deliver the best outcome to the customer. You can accomplish that in that time and budget that you need, but you just have to approach it in a different way, and that's what we're trying to offer.
Yeah, no, that sounds super. And I guess thinking about that particular example too, if that's a 2005 system, it was decommissioned, I think, in 2005, from their perspective, the testing strategies and tools that were available back then are completely different
They would be
today. So, you can sort of imagine a whole lot of systems sitting, lurking in the back room of all sorts of companies that have just been there for so long. People just almost forget that they exist. So that must be a fun topic for you to address.
It's a tough one as well because, like you said, they just have existed for so long, and it ain't broke. That's the kind of approach people take. Is we don't want to do anything with it because it's been working, so I don't want to touch it. And I think really there's a lot of conversation in our sphere about moving to cloud and things of that nature. The one benefit that I can tell you from a testing or a quality perspective is that being up to date with all the latest patches and security measures, because when you are in the cloud, you're actually moving at pace with the cloud organization, whereas like you mentioned, when you were, able to install something in your local organization, you keep it on a server. If you don't want to update it, you just decide you don't want to because you don't want to go through the testing and you don't want to go through everything, and it's already working. So let's not touch that. Let's go to the next. It's on our, yes.
It's in the corner.
That's right.
Not connected to the internet, maybe. So
Yeah.
until one day something goes wrong.
Until it goes wrong. So it is one of the things that does help us now because we have a new thinking, and now we're and again, it's one of those reasons why we do really like to do automation as well, because every time they do an update now, we have to do some type of testing. There's no, option, right? We have to say, we're going to have an update. It's going to happen 2 weeks from now. How are we going to test to make sure it's not going to break something? So we now are able to kind of push through those automated tests, really do that core testing right away, and then we can just really focus on the stuff that's more elaborate.
So you're talking there about embedding a culture of testing, of regular routine testing, not just a project-based set of testing inside the organization as well. So that must be a fun thing to sell, isn't it?
It is, because it is a culture thing.
Yeah,
and it's trying to really push culture in the culture of quality across the organization and at all levels. And really not thinking about it as it is the tester's responsibility to find issues. It's really our organization's obligation to our customers and to ourselves to make sure that we're driving out issues early. And if you can think of it that way, then you really put a lot more focus at the early stages where you're planning for success almost, instead of hoping that you have this team of hotshot testers who can find the things that will ail you before it hits customers. You're really kind of putting that mindset into the whole org, and I think that's really the new thinking that we try to sell.
Yeah. Okay. Terrific. So you're encouraging people to build a culture of testing and be really shifting it left. That's what you're talking about. You've got different messages for different people according to their role. You've got people inside testing teams who need perhaps a bit more persuasion sometimes to understand, the fun way, as you call it.
That's
people who need a little bit of a nudge there. You've got people in the C-suite who respond beautifully to the ROI. You can do better, more testing for the same money. You can invest earlier and spend less on your project, all those sorts of really terrific financial return and, customer satisfaction sorts of metrics, which really appeal there. And you've talked a little bit about when you're working with peer consultants as well, who've got, again, different motivations and how to cut through there. One thing we talked about, we might close on this one, we talked about earlier, was the difference in going inside. You've worked both inside organizations and going from the outside in.
That's right. My history is I've worked for several large financial organizations, banks, and the like, as an employee. And I've also done the same as a consultant from an external perspective for different consultancies, and now with TTC. It is different selling a message both internally and externally. So for people who are listening to this and they're already in an organization and they're already trying to sell this same message, it is tougher because you're selling from the inside. I actually found it much easier from an external perspective, but I can tell you a little bit about both. When you're selling from the inside, really what you're trying to do, like we talked about before, is that understanding the motivation of the people who you're working with, and I would say the people who you report to, because there's usually something that you need to help them solve. And if you can really try to use your knowledge of what they're trying to solve and use this quality message to help them solve it, then you usually can sell the message and say, I know you want to do faster, so let's talk about how we can do faster. That's probably adding the automation, and it's adding it at the right level so that you can save the time. And that will help you from an internal standpoint. When you're doing it from an external standpoint as a consultant coming in, and we quite often come into an organization and we'll say, let us do a review. We can do some interviews. We can take a look at what you have as far as your operations, your processes right now, and then we can give you some recommendations. The reason that's really successful is because we can not only use our internal knowledge. If we had that, we'll be using an industry kind of as a backing, because we use, what we've seen across the industry and what we've seen with industry trends that we can use as part of that recommendation. And it really helps people get the comfort that you're not just going to try this and it's the first time it's been done. We can, show them where and how it's been done successfully in other places. So it's a lot easier to come in and be able to say, this is how we would do it. But knowing that as an organization, we have people who have the experience is also a big help for us at TTC.
Yeah. And I think sometimes the outsider, just being an outsider, is often listened to because they're a different voice as
That's
well.
right. That's right.
Finding an outsider who's a wing person to come in with you and just, talk the talk. I've had that experience previously myself where one of my team said, I need you to come in and just explain to these people what I already know.
That's right. And probably said many times before, right? And it just didn't cut through.
Exactly. But they'll listen to you because you come from somewhere else. They'll listen to you.
Oh, so right.
There's a little bit of joy in being the outsider from that perspective. But
agreed.
That understanding the buttons and really working those internally can also be very effective, can't it?
Yeah, it can. You just have to make sure that you're doing your homework and getting, to navigate that internal process a little better.
Yeah. Fantastic. Look, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. I really loved hearing a bit more about testing and how it can be so interesting and so much fun, as opposed to, the more mundane pieces, which I'd been more, familiar with before we really got into talking about it. So it's delightful to speak to someone who really loves what they do and to, just see the fun in that. So thank you for sharing your ideas.
Thank you so much for having me along. This has been a fantastic, conversation. Really appreciate it. And I hope that, the people out there get something out of it and hope learned a bit. And if you have anything that you ever need, I'm here to talk. So let me know.
Absolutely. And look, if you would like to go to the show notes, you can learn a bit more about Kerry and where he comes from. You can also learn a bit more about his book. He's released that recently. It's called 10 Leadership Tools. Sorry, I've misspoken. 10 Leading Tools.
Leading Tools, yeah.
I've read it. It's terrific. There's a lot of really great practical ideas in there. And so if you visit clarityfirstprogram.com/podcast, you'll be able to find the details of those and learn a bit more about Kerry. So thanks so much, everybody. We look forward to talking to you again sometime soon. Bye for now.
Bye, all.